The morning sun cast long shadows across the tarmac at London Heathrow Airport as Inspector James Mitchell adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. After 23 years of dedicated service protecting the British royal family, he was finally taking his first vacation in over 2 years. His wife Sarah had planned every detail of their anniversary trip to the Mediterranean, and James couldn't hide his excitement as he approached the check-in counter. The airline representative, a young woman with perfectly styled blonde hair, greeted him with a practiced smile. "Good morning, sir. May I have your booking reference?" James handed over his documents, watching as she typed rapidly on her keyboard. Her expression gradually shifted from professional courtesy to obvious concern. "I'm terribly sorry, Mr. Mitchell," she began, her voice taking on an apologetic tone. "There seems to be an issue with your booking. Due to an aircraft change, we've had to downgrade your seats from business class to economy. We can offer you a voucher for future travel as compensation." James felt his stomach drop. This wasn't just about comfort. He had specifically booked business class because his back injuries from years of standing guard made long flights in economy seats nearly unbearable. Sarah appeared beside him, having finished checking in their luggage, and immediately sensed the tension. "What's happening, darling?" she asked, placing a gentle hand on his arm. James explained the situation while the airline representative maintained her apologetic but inflexible stance. Other passengers began forming a queue behind them, creating additional pressure to resolve the matter quickly. The representative offered various alternatives, none of which seemed adequate. They could take a later flight, but their hotel reservations couldn't be changed. They could accept the economy seats with a minimal voucher, or they could cancel entirely and receive a partial refund. Each option felt like a punishment for something completely beyond their control. James had always prided himself on remaining calm under pressure. During his years of service, he had faced genuine threats to royal safety, handled crowd control during major events, and maintained his composure in the most challenging situations. But this felt different. This was supposed to be his time, his reward for years of sacrifice and dedication. As other passengers began expressing their impatience with the delay, James felt a familiar presence behind him. The slight clearing of a throat made him turn around, and his training immediately kicked in. Standing just 3 people back in the queue was King Charles himself, dressed casually in a navy blazer and traveling with minimal security detail. Their eyes met briefly, and James felt his cheeks burn with embarrassment. Here he was, a member of the Royal Protection Detail, arguing about airline seats while the monarch he had sworn to protect watched from just a few feet away. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was creating exactly the kind of public disturbance he had spent his career preventing others from making. King Charles appeared to be traveling privately, likely trying to maintain a low profile for whatever personal journey he was undertaking. James knew from experience that the king valued his privacy during personal travel and worked hard to blend in with ordinary passengers when possible. The airline representative continued shuffling through options on her computer, but James could see in her expression that nothing better was forthcoming. Sarah squeezed his hand, silently communicating that they should simply accept whatever was offered and make the best of their situation. After all, they were together, and that was what truly mattered. But as James prepared to accept the economy seats and move on, he noticed something in his peripheral vision. King Charles had stepped slightly closer to the counter, close enough to overhear the entire conversation. Rather than appearing annoyed by the delay, the king's expression showed something James hadn't expected: genuine concern and what appeared to be growing displeasure with how the situation was being handled. James had witnessed the king's legendary attention to detail and his genuine care for the people who served the royal household. He had seen firsthand how King Charles remembered personal details about staff members, their families, and their challenges. But James never imagined that this same consideration would extend to a chance encounter at an airport check-in counter. The airline representative finally looked up from her screen with a finality that suggested no further options were available. "I really am sorry, Mr. Mitchell, but those are the only alternatives we can offer. We do appreciate your understanding in this matter." James nodded reluctantly, reaching for his wallet to complete the rebooking process. He had decided to accept the economy seats rather than ruin their long-planned anniversary trip. Sometimes, he thought to himself, You simply had to adapt to circumstances beyond your control. Before James could complete the rebooking, a gentle but authoritative voice spoke from behind him. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear your conversation." James turned to see King Charles approaching the counter, his expression thoughtful but determined. The airline representative's eyes widened in recognition, and she immediately straightened her posture. "Your Majesty," she stammered, clearly flustered by the unexpected royal intervention. Other passengers in the queue began to notice the commotion, some pulling out phones while others simply stared in amazement. James felt mortified that his personal travel issues had somehow drawn the king into a public scene. King Charles addressed, the airline representative with the calm authority that James had witnessed countless times during official duties. "I believe you're speaking with Inspector Mitchell, one of my personal protection officers. He's been in royal service for over 2 decades, and I suspect he's finally taking some well-deserved time off." The representative nodded eagerly, though she still seemed uncertain about how to handle the unprecedented situation. King Charles continued, his voice carrying the weight of quiet disappointment. "It seems rather unfortunate that someone who has dedicated his career to public service should be treated so dismissively when he's simply trying to enjoy a holiday with his wife." James wanted to protest that the king didn't need to involve himself in such matters, but years of training had taught him when to remain silent. Sarah stood beside him, equally amazed by the surreal turn of events. She had met the king briefly during official functions, but had never imagined encountering him in such an ordinary setting. The airline representative began typing frantically on her keyboard, clearly hoping to find a solution that would satisfy the unexpectedly royal witness to their customer service. "Let me see what other options might be available," she said, her previous finality completely abandoned. King Charles waited patiently, but James could see the subtle signs of royal displeasure that he had learned to recognize over the years. The slightly raised eyebrow, the particular way the king clasped his hands behind his back, the measured tone that suggested growing irritation with the situation. "Inspector Mitchell," the king said, turning to address James directly, "how long has it been since your last proper holiday?" James felt obligated to answer honestly. "Nearly 2.5 years, Your Majesty. Sarah and I have been planning this trip for months." The king nodded thoughtfully, then addressed the airline representative again. "I trust you understand that Inspector Mitchell's service record includes protecting my family during some rather challenging circumstances. He's been injured in the line of duty, threatened by dangerous individuals, and has worked countless hours without complaint. Surely your airline can find appropriate accommodation for such a dedicated public servant." Other passengers in the queue had begun to gather closer, many recording the unprecedented scene on their phones. Airport security personnel appeared, recognizing the potential for a crowd control situation, but King Charles waved them away with a subtle gesture that indicated everything was under control. The airline representative's typing became increasingly desperate. "I'm checking with my supervisor right now, Your Majesty. There might be some options we hadn't explored initially." Her tone had transformed completely from the dismissive attitude she had shown just minutes earlier. James felt a mixture of gratitude and embarrassment. While he appreciated the king's intervention, he worried about the attention and potential security implications of such a public scene. Royal protection officers were trained to blend into the background, not become the center of airport dramas involving their charges. King Charles seemed to sense James's discomfort. "Inspector, I hope you don't mind my involvement, but I've always believed that loyalty and service should be recognized and respected. Your years of dedication haven't gone unnoticed, and neither should your right to be treated fairly when you're traveling as a private citizen." Sarah finally found her voice, speaking directly to the king with a mixture of reverence and maternal concern. "Your Majesty, we truly appreciate your kindness, but we don't want to cause any trouble or security concerns." Her genuine worry about inconveniencing the king was evident in her voice. The king smiled warmly at Sarah's consideration. "My dear, there's no security concern here. Sometimes it's important to remind people that basic courtesy and respect should extend to everyone, regardless of whether they're in uniform or on holiday." The airline representative looked up from her screen with obvious relief. "I've been able to locate 2 seats in our premium business class cabin. They're actually better than your original booking. We can upgrade you at no additional charge, and we'll also provide dining vouchers as our apology for the inconvenience." James felt stunned by the sudden reversal. What had seemed like an immovable airline policy had dissolved completely under royal scrutiny. The representative printed new boarding passes with obvious haste, clearly eager to resolve the situation satisfactorily. King Charles observed the proceedings with satisfaction, but without any sense of triumph. To him, this seemed like simply ensuring that basic fairness prevailed. "Excellent," he said to the representative. "I trust Inspector and Mrs. Mitchell will receive the level of service that any passenger deserves, but particularly those who have served their country with such distinction." As the airline representative handed over the upgraded boarding passes, James noticed something unexpected happening around them. Other passengers who had been filming the encounter began approaching, not seeking selfies or autographs, but expressing genuine appreciation for what they had witnessed. An elderly gentleman in a veteran's cap stepped forward and addressed King Charles directly. "Your Majesty, if I may say so, that was beautifully handled. It's refreshing to see someone in your position standing up for ordinary working people." The veteran's words carried the weight of personal experience, and King Charles received them with gracious acknowledgement. A young mother traveling with 2 small children spoke up next. "My husband is in the military, and he often talks about how service members get overlooked. Thank you for showing that their dedication matters." Her children peered curiously at the king, who gave them a warm smile and a gentle wave. James watched in amazement as what could have been an embarrassing incident transformed into something entirely different. The crowd that had gathered wasn't seeking entertainment or social media content. They were witnessing something genuinely meaningful about respect, service, and basic human decency. The airline representative, now fully committed to making amends, continued offering additional courtesies. "Inspector Mitchell, we'd also like to provide you with priority boarding and access to our executive lounge. Please consider this our sincere apology for the initial misunderstanding." King Charles observed these developments with evident satisfaction, but James could see him preparing to step back and allow the situation to conclude naturally. Royal training had taught James to recognize when the king was ready to withdraw from public attention and resume his private activities. However, before departing, King Charles had one more surprise in store. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a small, elegant card. "Inspector Mitchell, I'd like you to have this," he said, handing James what appeared to be a personal note written in the king's distinctive handwriting. James accepted the card with trembling hands, unsure whether he should read it immediately or wait for a more private moment. King Charles gestured that he should read it now, and James carefully unfolded the handwritten message. The note read, "James, your dedication to protecting my family has never gone unnoticed. Every early morning, late evening, and missed family occasion in service of the crown represents a sacrifice that deserves recognition. Enjoy your well-earned holiday with Sarah, and know that your years of faithful service are deeply appreciated. Charles R." Sarah gasped softly as she read over James's shoulder, and several nearby passengers who could see the exchange fell silent with respect. James felt his eyes beginning to well up, overwhelmed not just by the king's intervention in their travel troubles, but by the deeply personal acknowledgement of his service. "Your Majesty," James began, his voice thick with emotion, "I've never expected any special recognition. Protecting the royal family has been the honor of my lifetime." His words came from the heart, reflecting genuine devotion that had sustained him through more than 2 decades of service. King Charles placed a gentle hand on James's shoulder. "That's exactly why recognition is deserved, Inspector. You've never sought it, never demanded it, and never compromised your duty regardless of personal cost. Those qualities define the very best of public service." The crowd around them had grown respectfully quiet, sensing that they were witnessing something both intimate and historically significant. Airport staff had arrived to manage the crowd, but they seemed reluctant to interrupt what was clearly a meaningful moment between the king and one of his longtime protectors. A businessman in an expensive suit stepped forward and addressed the airline representative. "I'd like to pay for their dining vouchers myself," he announced. "Anyone who serves our country the way this gentleman has deserves our support." His offer sparked a small wave of similar gestures from other passengers. The airline representative looked flustered by the additional complications but pleased by the positive atmosphere. "That's very generous, sir. but the airline is covering all expenses. However, I'm sure Inspector and Mrs. Mitchell appreciate the sentiment." King Charles watched these exchanges with visible pleasure, clearly enjoying the spontaneous outpouring of respect and support for one of his protection officers. "Inspector," he said quietly, "I believe you're discovering that your service has been noticed by more people than you might have realized." James looked around at the faces surrounding them, seeing genuine appreciation and respect from complete strangers who had simply witnessed an act of royal consideration for a faithful servant. The experience was transforming his understanding of how his years of quiet, background service had actually been perceived by the public. Sarah squeezed James's hand tightly, sharing in the overwhelming emotion of the moment. After years of watching her husband work long hours protecting others while receiving little recognition, she was finally seeing him honored in the most unexpected and meaningful way possible. As the crowd began to disperse and normal airport activities resumed, King Charles prepared to continue his own journey. However, he paused and turned back to James with a thoughtful expression. "Inspector, might I ask where you and Sarah are traveling for your anniversary?" James explained their destination, a small coastal town in Greece where Sarah had always dreamed of visiting. They had chosen the location specifically because it was quiet, romantic, and far from the pressures of royal duties and protection responsibilities. The king listened with genuine interest, asking about their planned activities and how long they intended to stay. "Greece is magnificent this time of year," the king observed. "I have some fond memories of visiting that region." "You've chosen well." He paused for a moment, seeming to consider something carefully. "Inspector, I hope you won't mind, but I'd like to make one additional arrangement for your holiday." James felt a flutter of concern, wondering what the king might have in mind. His years of service had taught him that royal arrangements could sometimes be wonderfully generous, but also potentially overwhelming for the recipients. King Charles continued, "I have contacts at a rather special resort near your destination. Nothing ostentatious, but they provide exceptional service and privacy. I'd like to arrange for you and Sarah to spend a few days there as my personal guests. Consider it a small token of appreciation for your years of faithful service." Sarah gasped softly at the unexpected generosity. James felt torn between gratitude and his natural reluctance to accept what seemed like an extravagant gift. "Your Majesty, that's incredibly kind, but we couldn't possibly accept such generosity." The king smiled at James's predictable response. "Inspector, you've spent over 20 years ensuring my family's security and comfort, often at considerable personal sacrifice. Allowing me to contribute to your comfort and enjoyment for a few days seems like a reasonable exchange." An airline announcement echoed through the terminal, calling for the boarding of their flight. The reality of their departure was beginning to intrude on the extraordinary encounter, but King Charles seemed determined to complete his arrangements. "I'll have my private secretary contact the resort today," the king continued. "They'll expect you and won't make any fuss about the arrangements. You can simply enjoy yourselves as any other guests would." His casual mention of involving his private secretary underscored just how seriously he was taking this gesture of appreciation. James realized that refusing the king's gift would actually be more disrespectful than accepting it graciously. Royal protocol had taught him to recognize when the monarch had made a decision that shouldn't be questioned or declined. "Thank you, Your Majesty. Sarah and I are deeply honored by your kindness." The king looked pleased by James's acceptance. "Excellent. Now you should probably proceed to boarding. I believe they've called your flight, and you don't want to miss the start of your holiday after all this effort to secure proper seats." As James and Sarah prepared to leave, the airline representative approached with one final gesture. "Inspector Mitchell, on behalf of our entire airline, I want to personally apologize for our initial handling of your situation. We're implementing new policies to ensure that service members and their families receive the recognition and courtesy they deserve." Her announcement drew approving nods from the remaining passengers, and James realized that their encounter had potentially created positive changes that would benefit others in similar situations. The ripple effects of the king's intervention were extending far beyond their personal circumstances. King Charles observed these developments with evident satisfaction. "Sometimes," he said quietly to James, "a single moment of standing up for what's right can create changes that last much longer than the moment itself. Your service has always represented those same principles. A final boarding call for their flight prompted James and Sarah to begin moving toward their gate. As they gathered their carry-on bags, King Charles offered one last piece of advice. "Inspector, during your holiday, I want you to forget about protection duties, security protocols, and royal responsibilities. Focus entirely on enjoying time with your wife and celebrating your anniversary. That's a royal command." The gentle humor in the king's voice made it clear that he understood how difficult it would be for James to completely switch off his professional instincts. But the underlying message was serious. This holiday was meant to be truly restorative and personal. James extended his hand for what he expected to be a formal handshake, but King Charles surprised him by pulling him into a brief, genuine embrace. "Thank you for everything you've done for my family, James. Enjoy every moment of your well-deserved break." Sarah received an equally warm farewell from the king, who wished her a happy anniversary and thanked her for the sacrifices she had made as the wife of a protection officer. "Your support has made James's service possible, and that contribution is equally valuable," he told her. As James and Sarah walked toward their departure gate, they could hardly believe what had just occurred. The upgraded boarding passes felt substantial in James's hand, tangible proof of an encounter that already seemed almost dreamlike. Other passengers from their original queue were also heading to the same gate, many stopping to congratulate them or share their own thoughts about what they had witnessed. A teenage girl traveling with her parents approached them shyly. "My dad says you protect the royal family," she said to James. "That must be really scary." "Sometimes." Her innocent curiosity reminded James of why his work mattered, beyond the protocol and ceremony. "Sometimes it can be challenging," James replied gently. "But it's mostly about being prepared and staying alert. The royal family are wonderful, people who deserve to feel safe while they're serving the country." His explanation satisfied the girls' curiosity while maintaining appropriate discretion about security matters. At the departure gate, the airline staff recognized them immediately and ushered them to the priority boarding line. As they waited, James reflected on how completely their day had transformed. What had begun as a frustrating travel setback had become one of the most meaningful encounters of his entire career. Sarah squeezed his arm as they watched other passengers boarding the aircraft. "Do you think this really happened?" she whispered. "Did the king actually intervene to help us with airline seats?" Her amazement mirrored James's own difficulty processing the surreal sequence of events. "I keep thinking I'll wake up and discover it was all an elaborate dream," James replied. "But I have his handwritten note in my pocket, and these boarding passes are definitely real." He patted his jacket pocket where he had carefully stored the king's personal message. When their boarding group was called, they proceeded to the aircraft and were escorted to their upgraded seats in the premium cabin. The flight attendants had clearly been briefed about their situation and treated them with exceptional courtesy without making them feel uncomfortable or overly conspicuous. As the aircraft prepared for takeoff, James looked out the window and spotted King Charles boarding a different aircraft at a nearby gate. Even from a distance, he could see the minimal security detail and the king's obvious preference for traveling as privately as possible. The contrast with the elaborate security arrangements during official duties was striking. Sarah noticed his observation and followed his gaze. "It's strange seeing him as just another passenger," she commented. "After years of watching you work to protect him, it feels odd to see him looking so normal." Her perspective highlighted the unique nature of their encounter. During the flight, James found himself repeatedly reading the king's handwritten note. The personal nature of the message, combined with the specific acknowledgement of his sacrifices and service, meant more to him than any official commendation or ceremony could have provided. This was genuine recognition from someone who truly understood the demands of his role. The flight crew continued providing exceptional service throughout their journey, but James noticed they were treating all passengers with enhanced courtesy. Several crew members mentioned that their morning encounter at the airport had already become a talking point among airline staff, inspiring discussions about customer service and respect for service members. Halfway through the flight, the captain made an unusual announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have some special passengers aboard today, whose story has already inspired our entire crew. Inspector Mitchell, a member of the Royal Protection Unit, and his wife Sarah are celebrating their anniversary. We'd like everyone to join us in wishing them a wonderful holiday and thanking Inspector Mitchell for his years of dedicated service. The cabin erupted in spontaneous applause, with passengers throughout the aircraft turning to smile and wave at them. James felt overwhelmed by the unexpected recognition and the genuine warmth from complete strangers. Sarah reached for his hand, tears of happiness streaming down her cheeks. A businessman across the aisle raised his champagne glass in a toast. "To those who serve and protect," he announced loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. The gesture sparked similar toasts throughout their section of the cabin, creating an atmosphere of celebration and appreciation. As the aircraft began its descent toward their destination, James realized that their story had taken on a life of its own. Passengers were sharing the encounter on social media. Airline staff were discussing improved policies for service members, and the ripple effects of the King's simple act of consideration were spreading far beyond their original situation. Sarah looked out the window at the Mediterranean coastline appearing below them. "James," she said softly, "I think this is going to be more than just our anniversary trip. I think it's going to be the most magical holiday we've ever had." Her prediction seemed increasingly likely as they prepared to land in Greece, where the King's additional arrangements awaited them. Upon landing in Greece, James and Sarah discovered that the King's arrangements extended far beyond what they had imagined. A discreet representative met them at the arrival gate, introducing himself simply as Andreas from the resort. He explained that their luggage would be handled separately and guided them to a private car waiting. Outside the terminal, the drive through the Greek countryside was breathtaking, with olive groves and ancient ruins dotting the landscape. Andreas proved to be an excellent guide, sharing stories about local history and culture while maintaining the respectful distance that suggested he was accustomed to serving discerning guests who valued their privacy. As they wound through coastal roads overlooking the brilliant blue Mediterranean, Andreas mentioned casually that their accommodation had been personally selected by His Majesty during his own visit several years ago. The revelation that King Charles had actually stayed at the same resort added another layer of meaning to his generous gift. The resort itself exceeded every expectation James and Sarah had harbored. Nestled into a hillside overlooking a private cove, the property blended seamlessly with the natural landscape while providing luxurious amenities that spoke of understated elegance rather than ostentatious display. Their suite featured a private terrace with panoramic ocean views, comfortable furnishings that invited relaxation, and thoughtful touches that reflected genuine hospitality. Fresh flowers, local delicacies, and a handwritten welcome note from the resort management created an atmosphere of warmth and personal attention. The resort manager, a distinguished gentleman named Dmitri, personally welcomed them and explained the various amenities available. His Majesty specifically requested that you be allowed complete privacy and relaxation, he explained. Our staff will be available for anything you need, but otherwise, you should feel free to enjoy our facilities without any formality or schedule. As evening approached, James and Sarah found themselves dining on their private terrace, watching the sunset paint the Mediterranean in brilliant shades of orange and pink. The tranquility was profound after years of James's high-stress responsibilities and the constant awareness of potential security threats. "I keep expecting my radio to crackle with some urgent message," James confessed to Sarah over dinner. "It's strange to sit somewhere beautiful and not be scanning for potential problems or thinking about escape routes and security protocols." His observation highlighted how deeply his professional instincts had become ingrained. Sarah smiled at his honesty. "Maybe that's exactly why King Charles chose this place. He probably understands better than anyone how difficult it is for people in your position to truly relax and feel safe enough to enjoy themselves." Her insight reflected her own understanding of the unique pressures faced by those who protect others. Later that evening, as they walked along the resort's private beach, James discovered a message waiting for him at the reception desk. The envelope bore the royal seal, and inside was another handwritten note from King Charles. "James and Sarah, I hope you're discovering the peace and beauty that first drew me to this special place. Take time to reconnect with each other, and remember what life feels like when duty temporarily gives way to pure enjoyment. You've earned every moment of happiness. Charles R." The King's continued thoughtfulness overwhelmed James once again. Even while presumably enjoying his own private time, the monarch had taken the trouble to ensure that their experience was everything he had intended it to be. Over the following days, James and Sarah explored ancient ruins, swam in crystal-clear waters, enjoyed long conversations without interruption, and rediscovered the romance that had sustained their relationship through years of demanding schedules and security concerns. The resort staff maintained the perfect balance of attentiveness and discretion that made their stay feel both luxurious and genuinely relaxing. On their third day, while enjoying breakfast on their terrace, Sarah noticed James seemed more relaxed than she had seen him in years. His shoulders had lost their characteristic tension. His expressions were more open and carefree, and he was actually sleeping through entire nights without the hypervigilance that usually characterized his rest periods. "You know," Sarah observed, "I think King Charles understood exactly what you needed better than we did ourselves. This isn't just a luxury holiday. It's actually therapeutic." Her recognition of the deeper purpose behind the King's gift highlighted the thoughtfulness that had gone into his selection of this particular destination and experience. James nodded, feeling the truth of her words. "I'm beginning to understand why he values this place so much. There's something about the combination of natural beauty, privacy, and genuine hospitality that allows you to remember who you are beyond your professional responsibilities." That afternoon, while exploring a local village, they encountered other travelers who recognized them from social media posts about their airport encounter. Rather than feeling invaded or uncomfortable, they found themselves enjoying conversations with people who expressed genuine appreciation for James's service and curiosity about their Greek adventure. As their magical week in Greece drew to a close, James and Sarah prepared to return to England with hearts full of gratitude and memories that would last a lifetime. The transformation in both of them was remarkable. Years of accumulated stress and fatigue had been replaced by renewed energy and a deeper appreciation for their relationship. On their final morning at the resort, Dmitri approached them with a special farewell gesture. "His Majesty has arranged for a small token to commemorate your stay," he explained, presenting them with a beautiful handcrafted piece of local pottery featuring traditional Greek designs. Inside was another note from King Charles. "A reminder of your time in this special place, and my continued appreciation for your dedicated service." The flight home was bittersweet, marked by reluctance to leave their paradise but excitement to share their incredible experience with friends and family. The airline crew on their return journey had also heard about their story and provided exceptional service, demonstrating how their encounter had influenced positive changes in customer service attitudes. Upon arriving at Heathrow, James was surprised to receive a message requesting his presence at Buckingham Palace the following week, for what was described as a brief meeting regarding recent events. His curiosity was piqued, but his years of service had taught him that royal summons often contained unexpected elements. When the appointed day arrived, James found himself once again in the familiar surroundings of the palace, but this time as a guest rather than a duty officer. King Charles received him in a private study, creating an atmosphere of informal conversation rather than official business. "James," the king began, "I trust you and Sarah enjoyed your time in Greece?" His genuine interest in their experience was evident, and James spent several minutes describing their wonderful holiday and expressing his profound gratitude for the king's extraordinary generosity. King Charles listened with obvious pleasure, asking detailed questions about their favorite activities and whether the resort had met their expectations. His familiarity with the location and its amenities suggested that his recommendation had been based on personal knowledge and careful consideration. "I'm delighted that you found it restorative," the king said, "but I've asked you here today for a different purpose entirely." He paused, allowing James to wonder what additional surprise might be forthcoming. "Your years of faithful service are approaching a natural transition point," the king continued. "I understand you've been considering your future beyond active protection duties." James nodded, acknowledging that he had indeed been thinking about eventual retirement and what his next chapter might involve. King Charles leaned forward slightly, his expression becoming more serious. "I'd like to offer you a new role if you're interested. I'm establishing a new program to support veterans and service members who are transitioning to civilian life. Your experience, both in protection work and in understanding the challenges faced by those who serve, would be invaluable in helping others navigate similar transitions. The unexpected offer stunned James. Rather than simply acknowledging his past service, the king was proposing a meaningful way for him to continue contributing while beginning a new phase of his career. The position would utilize his skills and experience while addressing a cause clearly close to the king's heart. The role would involve working with various veterans organizations, helping develop support programs, and serving as a liaison between the royal household and service communities, the king explained. It would be meaningful work that makes a real difference in people's lives. And it would allow you to transition gradually from active duty while remaining connected to service in a different way. James felt overwhelmed by the opportunity to transform his years of dedicated service into a new form of contribution that could help others facing similar challenges. The position represented everything he could have hoped for in a career transition: meaningful work, continued service, and the chance to make a positive impact on other veterans' lives. "Your Majesty," James responded, his voice thick with emotion, "I would be deeply honored to accept such a role. The opportunity to help other service members while continuing to serve in a new capacity exceeds anything I could have imagined." King Charles smiled warmly at James's acceptance. "Excellent. I believe your combination of practical experience, personal integrity, and genuine care for others will make this program something truly special." As James prepared to leave the meeting, King Charles offered one final observation. "You know, James, our encounter at the airport reminded me of something important. Sometimes the most meaningful moments occur not during formal ceremonies or official duties, but in ordinary situations where we simply choose to treat each other with dignity and respect. Your years of service represent that principle in action, and I'm confident your new role will continue that tradition." James left Buckingham Palace that day with his heart full of gratitude, excitement, and renewed purpose. What had begun as a simple anniversary trip disrupted by airline bureaucracy had transformed into a life-changing series of events that would define his future in ways he never could have anticipated. The story of their airport encounter continued spreading through social media and word of mouth, inspiring conversations about service, respect, and the importance of recognizing those who dedicate their lives to protecting others. James and Sarah's experience had become more than a personal triumph. It had evolved into a reminder of the values that make society strong and the importance of honoring those who serve with dedication and humility.